A flash of lightning split the sky as Carson Hale barreled down the winding gravel road, rain hammering his windshield like a barrage of steel pellets. His knuckles ached, white on the steering wheel, when headlights swept past a lone figure in military fatigue clutching a small girl whose soaked hoodie clung to her trembling shoulders. Without a second thought, Carson slammed the brakes, sending a spray of mud across the cab. He threw open the door against the storm's roar, soaked to the bone, and shouted, "Hey, get in!" The soldier's eyes, sharp and guarded, locked onto his for a heartbeat before she scooped the little girl into trembling arms and sprinted to safety. In that charged moment, Carson knew nothing would ever be the same. If this moment grabbed you, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and hit subscribe to follow every twist of this unexpected journey. The old pickup's engine groaned as Carson Hale killed the ignition and reached for the spare towels behind the seat. His rain-slicked boots thudded on the porch boards of his cedar cabin, each step a muted echo in the storm-dark night. Inside, the warm glow of a single lantern cut through the pitch, casting dancing shadows that trembled like distant ghosts on the walls. Carson's son, Noah, peeked from behind the doorway, eyes wide beneath damp curls. "Daddy." She looked scared. He tugged at Carson's sleeve, breath visible in the frosted air. Noah's small voice was a soft counterpoint to the thunder still rumbling beyond the roof. "Give her time," Carson whispered, wrapping a towel around his own shoulders. "Let's get them warmed up." Moments before, Carson's life had been simple in its routine, a quick piano lesson rescue mission followed by a late dinner and bedtime stories. But when he'd seen the soldier and her daughter stranded on the roadside, arms clutched together against the wind, instinct had overridden caution. He'd cracked the window just enough to hear her soft plea. Shelter closes soon carried away on the wind, and he couldn't drive on. He returned to the cab for company, a steaming thermos of broth and a plastic container of peanut butter sandwiches, Ellie's favorite still warm in the center console. Noah helped Carson set the tray on the kitchen counter. The tin roof rattled overhead as Carson poured 2 bowls, the steam curling like fragile promises between them. Noah placed one bowl in front of him, the other at the edge of the bench. "If she's hungry," Noah said with solemn conviction, "she'll eat." 10 minutes later, the door knocker's hesitant rap punctuated the storm's fury. Carson set down the ladle and wiped his hands on a towel. The lantern's glow caught the soldier's face. First sharp cheekbones, a faint scar arching above her eyebrow. Eyes the color of steel. "Captain Eliza Ward," the woman said, voice low but controlled. The girl rubbed her eyes, confusion mingling with relief as Carson offered the bowl. Kinship flickered across Eliza's gaze. Soldiers recognize acts of mercy, like homing beacons, and at last she slid inside, closing the door on the storm. Eliza laid Lily gently in Carson's lap, accepting the bowl with a brief nod. Noah scooted aside, offering his own lap as a makeshift high chair. The little girl's toothless smile was a shot of warmth through the chill as she scooped up soft bread. Carson watched from the stove, stirring another pot of broth, eyes drifting to Eliza's tight shoulders. "How far'd you come?" Carson asked, voice even. Lightning scribbled across the sky. Rain spattered against the window. Eliza swallowed. "Fort Stewart," she murmured. "Got discharged yesterday. Trying to find housing. Every shelter's full." Her gaze flicked to the envelope she clutched, VA stamp on the corner, promise of rejection. She didn't look at Noah, but he sensed her tension and slid off his chair. He patted over and placed a hand on hers. "I have goldfish," he whispered conspiratorially. Eliza's lips twitched. Noah beamed. "She's your new best friend," he declared. Carson offered Eliza a mug of tea, gunmetal black, brewed strong. She accepted, wrapping both hands around its heat like lifelines. He didn't push for more details. The night was heavy with stories unsaid. Instead, he guided her past framed photos of his late wife Marlene, a snapshot of laughter next to a picnic blanket, and the silence spoke its own kindness. When the storm finally eased at dawn, a hush settled across the cabin. Outside, the world was washed clean pine needles, bowed under rivulets of water gravel gleaming with promise. Inside, Eliza sat by the window, Lily tucked into a borrowed quilt. Noah sketched raindrops and frogs on scrap paper, humming as he worked. Carson stood behind them, coffee in hand, watching the first slivers of sunlight cut through the gray. Eliza's voice broke the quiet. Why? Why stop? She gestured to Noah. Carson set down the coffee and crouched beside them. Because he needs a dad who keeps his promises, he said gently. And because once in a while a little kindness can feel like coming home. Eliza met his gaze, then a shared recognition that some wounds ran deeper than any battlefield. She nodded, that same spark of hope kindling in her eyes as it had on the roadside. Carson stood and moved to the stove, humming a soft country tune Marlene used to love. No words were needed. The warmth spreading through the cabin was promise enough that in the storm's aftermath they had found something worth sheltering each other. Carson's heart hammered in his chest as he killed the engine and climbed out into the deluge. The rain hissed against his jacket, turning the world into a frosted blur. Noah pressed close behind him, sneakers squelching on the gravel, as he offered the soldier a damp smile. In the amber glow of the headlights, Eliza Ward's posture shifted just a fraction, but it was enough. Here, Carson called, holding out the towel with a gentle firmness. His voice cut through the storm like a beacon. Get dry. Eliza hesitated for a heartbeat, then knelt, draping it around her daughter first. Lily's small face emerged, cheeks pink from cold eyes, wide but trusting, as Carson stretched the towel around Eliza's shoulders. Noah retreated a step, letting the soldier reclaim warmth and dignity. Thank you, Eliza said, voice low and steady. She wrapped her arms around the towel, drawing it tight. The intensity in her steel-gray eyes softened just a touch, as if permission had been granted to let down her guard. Carson nodded, then turned back to his truck. Come on, there's room. He threw open the passenger door and beckoned them inside. The interior was a steamy refuge, the dash lights glowed. The heater hummed, and the scent of wet leather mixed with peanut butter sandwiches and oatmeal cookies. Lily clambered in first, settling into the booster seat as Noah buckled her in with surprising care. Eliza hesitated, scanning the road behind them, the shuddering silence of the storm. Then she slid into the seat beside Carson, her uniform still heavy waterlogged, as if she carried the storm on her person. And you are Carson? Asked, pulling the door shut against the wind. Captain Eliza Ward, she replied, voice controlled. Her gaze flicked to Noah. And this is my daughter Lily. He offered a curt nod, glancing in the rearview mirror. Noah Hale, the boy said, flashing a grin. I'm 10. That makes me your expert snack provider. Lily sniffled, then cracked a shy smile. Thank you, she whispered, reaching for a goldfish cracker that Noah handed her. Carson returned his attention to the storm. The windshield wipers slapped tirelessly, carving arcs through the rain. Cabin's not far, just past Sycamore Ridge. You'll be warm soon. Eliza leaned back, her reflection fragmented by shifting water. She began, then swallowed. Thank you for stopping. He glanced at her, jaw set. A woman and child in the rain didn't hesitate. He tapped the steering wheel. You'd do the same for me. Her eyes softened in the mirror. I hope so. The truck lurched forward as Carson shifted into gear. The road plunged into darkness, flanked by pine trees bowed under the downpour. Lightning flickered through the canopy, illuminating frantic branches like skeletal hands. Noah, clutching a soggy teddy bear, pointed out the window. Look. Fireflies. Carson followed his gaze. In spite of the storm, faint pinpricks of light drifted above the shoulder, a pocket of summer magic. Eliza tilted her head, watching the shimmer. For a moment the rain's roar receded, replaced by the gentle glow of tiny lanterns aloft. They're still out, Lily murmured, clutching a cracker to her chest. Carson smiled in the mirror. Some lights can't be put out. Eliza drew in a shaky breath, her posture loosening. I needed to see that. He flicked the wipers to high. We all do. They drove in silence, the rhythm of engine and wipers forming its own language. Carson caught Eliza's profile, strong jaw, soft tension around her eyes. He thought of Marlene, his wife, whose voice used to fill this cab with laughter on nights like this before the cancer that took her. He stifled the ache that rose in his chest, focusing on the road, on the mother beside him, soaked and vulnerable, and the girl behind. At the fork near Old Willow Bridge, Carson slowed to navigate the gravel. The rain drew closer, pressing in like breath on skin. Eliza glanced at the narrow track rising into the woods. You sure this is the right way? She asked. He nodded, pulling the wheel across ruts that sliced through puddles. Been coming here since I was a kid. Built it with my old man. He chuckled softly. He said a man who can fix his own roof can handle most storms. Eliza managed a small smile. Did he teach you to fix people too? Carson's grip tightened on the wheel. He tried. But most people need to want it themselves. Her gaze dropped, and Lily snoozed against her shoulder fatigue, overtaking fear. In the rearview mirror, Noah watched them with wide, thoughtful eyes. Almost there, Carson said, pointing as the trees thinned. Beyond the tree line, a single lantern flickered on a weathered porch. Its warm light pooled around a rough-hewn bench and a stack of firewood. Eliza watched the glow, remembering the first night she'd slept at the VA shelter that never had space for her family. She flinched at memories of concrete floors, the tight hush of cots lined in rows, the ache of being just another name on a list. Here, under that porch light, she felt seen. Carson parked, cutting the engine. For a heartbeat, the only sounds were the drip of water off metal and Eliza's soft breath. Then, with a practiced move, Carson opened his door and shook out the towel. Lily stirred, eyelids fluttering. "Let me," Eliza said quietly, rising. She reached back, gathered Lily in her arms, and eased out into the porch light. Noah scrambled past her, eager to help, and Carson followed close behind. Inside the cabin was a sanctuary of cedar and warmth. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, its aroma of carrots and onions wrapping around them like a hug. The hearth crackled as embers glowed, and blankets draped over a worn sofa invited them to sink in. Carson handed Eliza a steaming bowl and took his own seat across from her. Lily, half awake, curled into Noah's lap with a soft sigh. Eliza held the bowl with both hands, studying the steam. She blew gently, then tasted. "It's perfect," she said, voice thick. Carson met her eyes. "Marlene's recipe," he said softly, as if her spirit still lingered in the kitchen. She believed soup could fix a bad day. Eliza's gaze drifted to a faded photograph on the mantel. Carson, Marlene, and Noah on a picnic blanket, smiles bright under blue skies. The grief she carried always just beneath her skin tightened like a fist. But here in this room it felt safe to let it shift, to believe that second chances existed. She swallowed hard, then looked back at Carson. "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't need to." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a lantern ornament, handing it to her. "This is so you never forget the way a little light can cut through darkness." Eliza's hand trembled as she accepted it. Lily stirred, blinking up at her mother. Eliza tucked the ornament into her pocket and scooped Lily into her arms. Noah hopped off the sofa and offered Eliza his handprint drawing, 4 figures under a glowing lantern. Carson smiled as Eliza studied the picture, her eyes shimmering. "Best thank you I've ever seen," she murmured. Then she looked around the cabin at its simple comforts and the kindness that filled every corner. "Welcome home," Carson said, voice gentle. And in that moment, with the rain still tapping against the windows but the porch light burning steady, Eliza knew she and Lily had found a refuge not just from the storm, but from the fear of never belonging again. She let the tears come, and Carson gave her the space to let them fall, knowing that sometimes the first healing happens in the quiet company of strangers turned friends. The cabin door swung open with a low creak, and the warmth inside enveloped Eliza and Lily like a long-awaited embrace. Wet footprints curled across the rough-hewn pine floorboards, trailing the scent of rain and pine needles. Carson closed the door behind them, the latch clicking into place like a promise. He handed Eliza a thick woolen blanket, and she draped it around her shoulders, her fingers brushing over damp fabric that now felt safe against her skin. Noah, already settled on the couch, jumped up to place a steaming mug of broth in Eliza's hands. Lily followed his lead, clutching a smaller cup, the wood grain warm under her palms. Eliza cradled the mug, inhaling the savory steam morsels of carrot and onion drifting like wisps of comfort. Her daughter's eyes widened at a swirl of parsley on top, and she took a tentative sip, her small face unfurling into relief as warmth spread from her lips to her toes. Carson moved to the stove, stirring another pot with a practiced rhythm. The gentle hiss of simmering soup underscored the silence that settled between them. No awkwardness, but a quiet acknowledgement of shared need. He glanced over his shoulder. Marlene used to say hot soup was a cure-all. His voice was low, carrying both humor and something more complicated, loss memory resilience. Eliza gave him a small nod, her gaze drifting to a framed photo on the mantelpiece. Carson, his late wife, and young Noah laughing together on a summer day. It was a moment frozen in sunlit joy, and for a fraction of a heartbeat, she felt an ache that was both foreign and familiar. She tightened her grip on the blanket, her knuckles whitening. Then she looked down at Lily tucked into her lap, forehead, resting against Eliza's chest, and that ache softened into gratitude. Noah hopped off the couch and disappeared into the corner where two sturdy wooden chairs were pulled close to a small table. He emerged with a stack of board books, placing them carefully between Eliza and Carson. He nudged Lily forward. "Here, try this one," he said, handing her a volume about woodland animals. "I know how much you like bunnies." Lily's eyes lit up. "Bunnies!" she exclaimed, opening the cover and tracing the watercolor illustrations of rabbits in a meadow. Eliza smiled a real smile, the corners of her mouth lifting freely, and brushed a damp strand of hair behind Lily's ear. Carson settled into one of the chairs, soup bowl in hand. "Read to us, Noah," he suggested, slipping into the ease of family life as if it were second nature. Noah cleared his throat dramatically, adopting the voice of a storyteller. "Once upon a time in a forest just like these woods lived a brave little rabbit who—" His words wove through the cabin, knitting them together in a tapestry of sound that chased away the remnants of the storm. Outside, the porch light glowed steadfastly, its beam cutting through the dusk like a beacon. Eliza glanced toward the window, noting how the raindrops clung to the glass and refracted the warm glow back into the room. That light had saved her tonight, had drawn her here, and now it stood guard. She felt the weight of past nights spent alone in unfamiliar shelters, the flash of fluorescent corridors, and the hush of strangers breathing. This was nothing like that. Here she and Lily were not names in a logbook. They were guests of a man who had opened his home without question. When Noah finished the story, he closed the book with a satisfied sigh and hopped onto the arm of the couch, close enough to slip an arm around Lily's shoulders. The two children exchanged conspiratorial glances before turning to Eliza. "Will you stay a while?" Lily asked in a small voice, the steam from her bowl catching in the lamplight. Eliza's heart trembled. She looked at Carson, whose face was gentle, inviting. He nodded as if he carried no judgments, only understanding. "You're safe here," he said, simply, his words wrapping around her like the blanket on her shoulders. That night the storm raged beyond the walls of Cedar Hollow cabin, but inside a different storm was breaking, one of walls and defenses. Eliza lay on the pull-out sofa-turned bed in the guest room, Lily tucked beneath a soft quilt. The faded wallpaper and creak of the bed frame felt strange yet warm. As Lily's breathing deepened, Eliza watched her daughter's eyelashes flutter, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale. She slipped from the bed and padded across the room in bare feet, the floor cool under her soles. She paused at the doorway, gazing into the kitchen, where Carson and Noah sat at the table bowls long since empty. Noah was cleaning up with the ease of routine, wiping the table, carrying dishes to the sink. Carson watched him, hands folded, a line of concern etched on his forehead. Eliza cleared her throat softly. Carson looked up, offering her a tired smile. "That was a great story," she said, her voice catching. He gestured to a chair. "Sit," he invited. She perched on the edge, the chair's seat cold beneath her. "Thank you," she whispered, tracking a spot on the floor. "For tonight, for everything." Carson leaned forward, his expression open. "We've all been through storms," he said. "Some just come in the shape of rain, and some in the shape of loss." His glance drifted to a small magnet on the fridge, a lantern with the words, "Keep the light on." "No matter what, this light stays on." Eliza nodded, tears glistening at the edge of her vision. "I haven't felt safe in so long," she admitted. "Not since—" She swallowed hard. "Not since I left the army." Her hands trembled on her lap. Carson reached across the table and laid a steady hand over hers. His skin was warm, this contact grounding. "You're safe," he repeated, "and we'll make sure it stays that way for as long as you need." At that moment, something shifted inside Eliza, a fracture beginning to close. She allowed herself to lean into his hand, drawing strength from his quiet certainty. Outside, the storm began to subside. Rain softened to a gentle patter as though the world recognized the peace inside the cabin and chose not to disturb it. The next morning, dawn filtered through the curtains in pale ribbons. Eliza woke to the scent of fresh coffee and wood smoke. She looked down to see Lily curled against Noah on the couch, blankets in a tangled heap around them. Their soft snores filled the room with an unexpected melody. Eliza rose, slipping into clothes dried by the stove's warmth, and padded into the kitchen. Carson stood by the counter mug in hand, watching the steam drift upward. His eyes lifted when he heard the door creak. He offered her the second mug, coffee black, just the way she liked it. Eliza accepted it, cradling the ceramic as if it were an anchor. For a long moment they stood side by side, listening to the early morning hush. Outside, mist curled around the trees, and the porch light, though no longer needed, still burned softly, a testament to the night before. Eliza raised her mug in a silent toast. Carson mirrored her gesture. "Thank you," she said again, but this time it carried the promise of new beginnings. Carson nodded, lifting his mug in return. "Welcome home," he murmured. The words settled between them like sunlight breaking through clouds, heralding a day filled with possibility and healing, and the unspoken hope that sometimes a single act of kindness can light the way out of the darkest storm. The kitchen light cast a soft pool of warmth against the dark knot of pines outside, and the cabin smelled of freshly chopped cilantro mingling with the rich scent of simmering lentil soup. Eliza sat on the edge of a wooden stool, fingers curled around a chipped mug of strong black tea, knuckles white against its enamel rim. The steam traced lazy spirals into the air, carrying away the sharp tang of salt from her tears, which she refused to wipe. Carson leaned over the stove, spoon in hand, stirring the olive-green broth until the lentils broke apart into velvet threads. He didn't press her, didn't fill the silence with empty chatter. Instead, he set the spoon aside, wiped his hands on a faded dish towel, and slid onto the bench beside her. The offset glow of the single lantern revealed the fine lines around his eyes, patient, weathered, gentle. "Where are you headed next?" he asked quietly, voice low enough that it blended with the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Eliza lifted her gaze, meeting his for a heartbeat, before looking down at the dark wooden table. "I'm not sure." She wrapped her free hand around the mug's handle as if she could anchor herself through contact with something solid. Discharged. The word felt foreign on her tongue, like an echo of a life she could no longer claim. "They let me go this morning. No permanent quarters, no stash of benefits yet, just this." She gestured to the duffel bag at her feet, its canvas frayed at the seams, and a stack of bills I can't afford to let slide. Carson's eyes softened. He reached across and folded his hand over hers, warm against her cold palm. "Those bills," he said, "they come due, whether the world's falling apart or not." His voice carried an unspoken truth, one he knew too well. "I've been there." Eliza's throat tightened. For a soldier trained to command and endure, admitting vulnerability was a battlefield in itself. Yet here, in the quiet glow of this cabin, she felt the walls around her heart loosen. She tilted her mug and took a slow sip, letting the tea's bitterness steady her. "No one's claimed me," she whispered. "You won't show up on their radar until I've been living under a bridge for weeks." Her lips quivered, but she held the confession steady. She remembered the last time she'd felt lost sleeping on those cold concrete floors at Fort Stewart, her daughter Lily clinging to her side, both of them drifting in nightmares of sand and gunshots. She swallowed hard. "I'm used to being strong, but right now I don't even know how to ask for help." Carson nodded, his gaze tracing the steam patterns. "Help doesn't have to be a transaction," he said. "Sometimes it's a door left open." He rose and crossed to the small shelf by the window, picking up a battered mason jar filled with firefly lanterns, little glass prisms of light he'd caught in summer nights. He set it between them. "If you need a place to stay, this porch light here is as good a promise as any." Eliza stared at the jar, then at the flickering lantern on the porch beyond the glass. She swallowed another sob, quiet now, but present. "I'm sorry," she murmured, head bowed. "I'm so sorry." Carson's hand came to rest on her back, steady, unhurried. "Don't apologize," he said. "There's nothing to forgive." Her apology wavered in the cool air, fragile as the mist that had settled outside. She pressed her mug to her lips, refusing to look at him, afraid he'd see the truth in her trembling reflection. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his own mug in a gentle salute and took a slow sip. The small ritual of sharing warmth was enough to bridge the chasm between them. Eliza's eyes stung as she met his gaze again. My daughter, she's only 6. Lily's. She needs someone who doesn't break at the first crack. The admission hurt more than any physical blow she'd received in training, but Carson only nodded. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for, he said softly. They bounce back in ways we forget when we get older. He glanced toward the hearth where embers glowed like embattled stars. I've got a spare room that's more than just a cot and a blanket. If you two want it, it's yours. Eliza closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. A spare room, an entire bedroom with faded flowered wallpaper and a bed that creaked under weight. It was more than any shelter she'd ever known. She pictured Lily curled under that quilt, safe from the damp and the dread. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. Thank you. She stopped, uncertain. Carson reached across the table and set her mug down. He slid a hand under hers and squeezed. You don't have to say anything, he said. Actions speak louder. Her chest tightened with gratitude and an unfamiliar spark of hope. She forced a smile, small but real. Can I ask you something? Anything, he replied. Why me? Her words spilled out in a rush. Why stop for us? There are hundreds of cars that passed by tonight. Carson retrieved a ladle and dipped into the pot, scooping out a bowl of soup. He placed it in front of her and sat back down. Because I've been that soldier, he said quietly. When my wife Marlene fell ill, I watched her fight for every breath. Some nights I didn't know if she'd make it to morning. I'd park outside hospitals, hands shaking, waiting for her to come out. He paused, gaze steady. I know what it feels like to be stranded, and I know what it's like to find a light on in the dark. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The silence stretched alive with unspoken memories of loss and the ache of love. She lowered her eyes, tears slipping free. Carson reached for a napkin and offered it to her. She pressed it between her fingers, inhaling the faint scent of pine from the cloth. I'm sorry, she said again, voice hushed, for bringing my storm to your door. He shook his head. This cabin was never just mine. He gestured at the lantern jars, the family photos, the nursery painting tucked above the bedpost. It belongs to anyone who needs to find their way home. Eliza exhaled, the tension in her shoulders ebbing away. She wrapped both hands around the soup bowl as if to anchor herself. Lily's soft snore from the adjoining room reminded her of why she'd fought so hard to survive, why she could never truly break. She raised her gaze to Carson, who offered a small, encouraging nod. She dipped her spoon into the soup and brought it to her lips. The warmth spread through her chest, scattering the lingering cold. With each bite, she felt the weight of the duffel bag ease on her spirit. Across the table, Carson watched her with a kind of quiet pride, not in her service record or medals, but in the courage it took to lower her guard and let someone in. When the bowls were empty, Carson stood and cleared the dishes. Eliza remained seated, running her thumb along the edge of the table's grain. The lamplight flickered as Carson rejoined her holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. He handed her one. This will help you sleep, he said softly. And if dreams get too loud. He trailed off, leaving the offer unspoken, but understood. She closed her fingers around the mug, feeling its warmth seep into her bones. Thank you, she said, her voice steady now, for everything. Carson sat beside her, their knees brushing under the table. The room felt smaller, cozier, as if it had contracted around their shared warmth. Outside, the night had fallen still. The only movement was the sway of pine boughs and the heartbeat of the porch light pulsing its promise into the darkness. Eliza leaned back against the bench, tilting her face toward the lantern's glow. Beside her, Carson exhaled a soft sound of contentment. She closed her eyes and let the quiet wash over her. The hum of the heater, the crackle of the fire, the steady thrum of her own pulse. For the first time since leaving the army, she allowed herself to believe that safety wasn't a fleeting photograph, but something you could live in. And as the cabin held them both in its gentle embrace, Eliza knew she was exactly where she needed to be. In the hush of that pine-scented room, 2 souls battered by life's storms found the courage to open their hands, and in doing so discovered that the brightest light often shines from within. The first light of morning crept through the spruce boughs, painting the cabin's interior in muted gold. Droplets on the window panes glimmered like tiny prisms, and the scent of pine drifted through the open door of the guest room. Eliza lingered in the threshold, wrapped in the soft quilt that had smelled of cedar and lavender the night before. Across the kitchen, Carson moved with familiar ease, filling the French press with coffee grounds and pouring in hot water. The hiss of steam rose from the carafe, and he set it down with a soft clink, brushing his bangs from his forehead as though waking from a dream. He glanced over his shoulder and caught sight of Eliza standing framed by dawn's fragile glow. In one movement he lifted 2 mugs, thick ceramic, 1 hand's worth of warmth, and offered her one. Coffee strong enough to wake ghosts, he said, his lips quirked with teasing comfort. The steam swirled between them, a silent bridge. Her hand trembled as she took the mug, fingers curling around it. "Thank you." Her voice came in a whisper as if she were afraid to break the morning's hush. He watched her shoulders ease, saw the small exhale that followed. He set a second mug on the counter for himself, then reached for the pour-over kettle to fill it. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, voice gentle enough to carry across the wooden floorboards. He didn't need to peer into her eyes to see the question there. The quilt clutched around her shoulders spoke of nights spent half awake, the shadows of memory stirring under her skin. Eliza lowered her gaze to the patterned mug, the dull swirl of coffee inside catching the light. She sipped, letting the bitterness ripple down her throat before answering. Better than recent weeks, she admitted, voice wavering. She raised the mug in a tentative toast, meeting his eyes over the rim. "Better than I dared hope." Carson nodded, stirring his own drink with a measured swirl. In the corner of the room through the arch, into the living area, 2 small figures huddled over coloring books on the rug. Lily flitted between shades of pink and purple, dotting her page with flowers that looked almost real. Noah bent close to his paper-drawing cats that seemed to giggle with crooked smiles. Every so often one nudged the other, and their laughter tinkled like chimes in an autumn breeze. "Kids are tougher than we think," Carson said, quietly, watching his son's earnest grin as Lily attempted to teach him how to draw whiskers. He set his mug on the countertop and leaned back against the cabinet, taking in the tableau children who had known fear, who had found laughter again in a stranger's cabin under drowsy morning light. Eliza moved forward and placed her mug beside his. The 2 of them looked at the children as if discovering them for the first time. In Lily's bright eyes and Noah's earnest chatter, she saw proof that life could bloom even where sorrow had taken root. She felt a tug at her heart, tender and insistent, and for a moment the distance between soldier and civilian dissolved. Carson reached out and tucked a damp strand of hair behind Eliza's ear. His fingers hovered for a second before settling against her temple warmth, against chill skin. "They remind me why we do this," he said. "Why we keep the light on." Eliza blinked and swallowed the sensation of his touch, more startling than the roar of gunfire ever had been. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she murmured, glancing at the lantern on the porch that had guided her here. "Not after—" Her voice faltered, the past creeping in like an unwelcome guest. He stepped closer, closing the space between them without rushing. "It's been 1 year today," he said softly, tone neither accusing nor mournful, merely factual. "Since Marlene passed. Time arced between them, a silent ribbon binding their experiences of love and loss." Eliza set her mug down and folded her arms, leaning into the warmth of the wooden wall behind her. She felt the weight of shared grief settle around them, 2 people who knew the stakes of holding on and the fear of letting go. "I'm sorry," she said again, but this time the words carried empathy instead of guilt. "I didn't mean to—" Carson lifted a hand to halt her apology. "No apologies," he said, voice firm with compassion. "We remember because we loved. That's not something to regret." Eliza closed her eyes and inhaled the scent of coffee and pine, grounding her. When she opened them, she saw in his gaze an understanding unspoken that memory could hurt, but it also had the power to heal when shared. A crash of giggles drifted from the living room as Noah tossed a handful of crayons at Lily. He won a delighted shriek in response, and the sound echoed off the logs like a celebration. Eliza smiled, and Carson's own lips curved in relief. He crossed the floor toward the children, and Eliza followed, tracing his steps, as if every footfall were a promise. Noah looked up and offered her a crayon sunshine yellow, and Lily pointed to a half-drawn sun in her sketchbook. Eliza knelt beside them, tucking her mug safely on the hearth's edge, and picked up the crayon. Her hands were steady now as she completed the sun's rays, her daughter's face lighting up at the shared creation. "Look, Mommy," Lily cried, pressing the drawing into Eliza's hands. "No," Eliza whispered, voice thick with emotion. Look, my brave girl, how bright you make this world. She scooped Lily into her arms, lifting her off the floor as if she weighed nothing. Lily laughed, wrapping her arms around her mother's neck, and for a moment everything else fell away. Carson watched from the doorway, a soft glow in his eyes. He cleared his throat and stepped forward, and Eliza set Lily down, brushing a kiss across her damp curls. Breakfast's on, he said, gesturing toward the counter, where fresh eggs, skillet-fried bacon, and thick slices of buttered toast waited in a feast of morning ritual. Eliza and the children gathered at the table, and Carson returned to the stove to slide plates across the worn wood. The smell of sizzling bacon mingled with pine and coffee, a triumphant symphony of comfort that made the cabin feel like a nest built just for them. They ate in companionable silence, interrupted only by the soft clink of cutlery and the occasional burst of childish delight when syrup pooled perfectly on warm toast. Carson watched Eliza serve Lily first, then Noah, and finally herself, a simple act that spoke volumes about her newfound role as protector-provider and mother reborn. After the last bite, Noah begged for another story. Eliza exchanged a glance with Carson, and he nodded, pulling a battered leather-bound journal from the top shelf. It was the one Marlene had kept a collection of recipes, doodles, and quiet observations about love and loss. Carson opened it to a blank page and handed it to Eliza. Your turn, he told her, voice soft and inviting. Eliza's eyes flicked from the journal to the children and back. She traced the empty lines with a fingertip. Fingertips trembling not with fear but with anticipation. She lifted the pen and pressed it to paper, her handwriting careful at first, then loosening as she wrote, Dawn breaks fragile, but we are fragile too, and that's all right, for here we learn to stand together in the light. When she looked up, tears held at the edge of her eyelashes. Carson smiled as though her words were the greatest gift he could receive. Lily crawled into Eliza's lap again, burying her face against her mother's shoulder, and Noah leaned close to peer at the writing. In that quiet kitchen under the soft caress of morning, a single act of courage of lowering her guard and opening her heart blossomed into something deeper. It was more than shelter from a storm. It was a declaration that love, resilience, and second chances could flourish even in the most fragile of dawns. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling warmth through the cabin's windows, they all felt it. The promise of a new day, bright with possibility, held safe by the light they kept burning for one another. Eliza climbed the rickety aluminum ladder with the ease of someone who trusted her footing more than the ground itself. The afternoon sun had burned through the morning mist, and warm light played on the cabin's siding as she reached the loose gutter bracket. In her gloved hand, the hammer felt familiar, its weight grounding her much as the butt of a rifle had once anchored her grip on a combat patrol. Below her, Carson held the ladder steady, his gaze a blend of admiration and relief. Nice form, he called up, voice carrying easily in the still air. Where did they teach you that Eliza tapped the bracket with a practiced flick of her wrist, securing it before swinging the hammer in a precise arc? Field maintenance training, she replied, settling the nail flush. Gutter work wasn't specifically in the manual, but the principles are the same. She climbed down and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. Never leave a post unsecured. Carson smiled and pointed to the ladder's feet. I'd feel better if this was on more solid ground. He tipped the ladder slightly, demonstrating its precarious lean. Without hesitation, Eliza shifted the ladder's base, pressing the legs into the gravel with her boot until it sat level and immovable. Better? She asked. Much better. Carson said, relief warming his tone. He picked up the small bag of nails by the porch railing. I owe you one. She shook her head. Just pay it forward. Her gaze drifted to the creek behind the cabin where Lily and Noah had kicked off their socks and chased frogs among the smooth stones. The children's laughter echoed like bells through the trees, and Eliza felt something loosen inside her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Carson joined her at the foot of the ladder, passing her a nail and then retrieving another when she offered the hammer back. They worked side by side, two hands driving nails, two minds synchronized in patience and quiet cooperation. After the final bracket was secured, Carson and Eliza stood back to admire their handiwork as rainwater began to dribble harmlessly into the downspout. Eliza ran a finger along the now straight gutter, her touchlight almost reverent. Looks good, she said. Should handle the next storm. The words came easily, and in that moment she welcomed the certainty of her own confidence. Carson glanced toward the creek. "Think they're having fun." "They're braver than I ever was," Eliza said, eyes softening at the sight of Lily leaping over a cluster of frogs before stumbling into Noah's arms with a squeal. "Kids just leap and no second thoughts." He nodded. "They remind me that life doesn't have to be overthought." He reached out and brushed a smudge of paint from her cheek. Yellow splotches gathered from Noah's rock painting expedition earlier. She froze, then allowed a small smile to curve her lips. It was a gesture neither forced nor tentative, but born of shared ease. Inside the cabin, steam curled from 2 mugs of freshly brewed lemonade, Carson's antidote to the day's heat. He carried them out to the porch and set one in Eliza's hand. For the world's best gutter specialist, he teased. Eliza accepted the glass, tilting it so the sun glinted through the pale liquid. "I'll take it," she said, touching the rim with a tentative sip. The cool sweetness was welcome on her tongue, and she savored the moment as if it were another kind of victory. They watched the children, barefoot and fearless, skirting rocks and glancing for new frog sightings. Each discovery a sudden leap, a whiff of wet earth, sent them into bubbling laughter. Eliza's chest swelled with a softness she barely recognized. In her past life, she had measured success in mission objectives and after-action reports. Here she found triumph in the simple joy of 2 children at play. Carson cleared his throat and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, "how does civilian life feel compared to all that?" He nodded toward the woods, toward the creek, toward the cabin. "No missions. No briefings at dawn." Eliza considered the question, turning the glass in her hand as if the answer might appear in the shifting light. "It's quieter," she said, "but not always peaceful. At first the silence was overwhelming. I kept expecting the next order to come through my earpiece." She laughed softly, the sound gentle in the afternoon warmth. "Here the only orders are from a 7-year-old demanding more paint on her rocks." Carson grinned. "Those are the best kind." He reached out and took her glass for a refill from his own. She met his eyes, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. They had both been hardened by past battles, his with grief, hers with life-and-death stakes, and now they were discovering that healing could happen in laughter, in camaraderie, in the quiet routines of home repair. Eliza took another sip of lemonade. "I never thought I'd find something like this," she admitted, gesturing broadly at the cabin, at the creek, at the children. "A place to rest my head without waiting for the next alert." Carson shrugged modestly. "It's been here a long time," he said. "Just needed someone to give it purpose again." His gaze drifted to the flagstone path leading to the garden beds, where rows of carrots and tomatoes promised harvest to come. "You gave it life again." Eliza watched him cock an eyebrow. "You forget I can map a building and mark every exit within seconds," she said, teasing him back. "I can find life anywhere." He laughed, a deep sound that rolled over the pond of her new trust. "I'll hold you to that," he said, but his tone was warm with gratitude rather than challenge. They lingered on the porch, sipping their drinks and listening to the creek's steady murmur. As the afternoon waned, the children's energy waned too. Lily trudged back toward the cabin, socks reclaimed and shoes in hand, while Noah carried a frog gently in an overturned bucket to show his mother. Eliza rose to help him place the bucket on the porch, then knelt to let the frog hop free back into the grass. "Go find your sister," she told the little amphibian as it bounded away. She straightened, catching Carson's eye with bright happiness. Some things deserve to be set free. Carson stepped closer, the late-day light gilding his profile. "You're learning fast," he remarked. Eliza smiled, warmth swelling in her chest. "I had a good teacher." She glanced at his hands, still faintly stained with rust from the gutter nails. "And a good partner." They collapsed onto the porch swing together, the gentle creak matching the rhythm of falling dusk. Carson draped a throw blanket over their knees, a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. The air cooled and the first fireflies emerged, tiny sparks hovering over the garden like living lanterns. Eliza rested her head on Carson's shoulder, watching the glow of frogs and fireflies as if they were old friends. "Thank you," she murmured, leaning into him, "for trusting me with your home." He shifted so he could kiss the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, "with your story and with Lily." He paused. With your heart. Her breath caught at the words, the unguarded confession resonating through her. In that moment, she understood that trust, like a gutter, mended and straightened, held the promise of shelter, and that building it, one nail at a time, created something far stronger than she had ever dared hope. They remained on the porch until the sky deepened into indigo, the children's laughter replaced by their soft snores within. The cabin stood firm against night's approach, its lights glowing steadfast, a testament to the quiet work of two people forging home together. The Cedar Ridge Farmers Market was a riot of color and warmth against the late summer sun. Wooden stalls overflowed with crimson tomatoes, pale peaches, and bouquets of sunflowers that nodded like cheerful sentinels. Carson led Eliza by the hand along the packed dirt paths, weaving through neighbors, greeting each other with familiar nods. The air smelled of cinnamon-spiced cider, fresh-baked bread, and the earthy tang of just-harvested herbs. Lily trailed behind them, her laughter chiming as she chased a cluster of butterflies that flitted among the flower petals. Noah darted ahead to inspect a display of honey jars, buzzing like a young beekeeper. Carson glanced at Eliza over his shoulder. "You doing okay?" he asked, voice gentle in the hum of activity. She lifted her chin and smiled, though the corners of her eyes held a cautious glint. "I am," she said. "This place, it feels like hope in shopping cart form." She swept an arm toward a stall where peach jam glistened in sunlight. Cherries shone like polished garnets, and mums spilled out of baskets. "I never thought I'd enjoy something as ordinary as a farmer's market." Carson grinned, squeezing her hand. "It's the simple things that remind us what matters." He stopped at a tent decorated with wildflower wreaths and squeezed behind a row of hanging lavender sachets. Eliza inhaled the calming scent and closed her eyes. The lavender drifted into her chest, and for a heartbeat, she forgot the ache she once carried. Then the scent shifted. Somewhere behind the mums and the honey, caramelized sugar and peanuts mingled in the air. At first it was sweet, a promise of roasted candied nuts. But beneath it lurked a darker undertone like burning oil on a roadside grill. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She froze, shoulders hunching as if braced against an invisible blast. Carson felt her stop. He turned concern knitting his brow. "Eliza." Her breath shuddered, and she looked around, eyes wide. "Peanuts," she whispered. I have to sit down." He guided her to a nearby bench, vowing silently to himself never to take her hand for granted again. "Take your time," he told her, voice steady. "I'll be right here." Eliza pressed her palms against her thighs and blinked, the world spinning back into focus through the stall's pastel umbrellas. "Sorry," she said. After a moment, voice rough. "It's silly." He shook his head. "Not silly," he said. "Memory's funny that way." He sat beside her and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know about memories that weigh more than truth." She glanced at him, surprised by the softness in his eyes. "You do?" Carson swallowed and ran a hand through his hair. "After Marlene passed, I couldn't sleep. Not for weeks. I'd lie on the floor next to her empty side of the bed because I couldn't bear the sheets. Every little sound was like footsteps in an empty hallway. Every creak was her coming back. I'd wake up in a panic, convinced she was there." Eliza's chest tightened. She had never asked about his wife, and here he was unburdening himself as if trust were the easiest thing in the world. He continued, voice low. "Once I drove all night just to get away from the silence. Parked on a roadside, listening to the engine just so I could hear something. I didn't stop until dawn." He exhaled and let his head fall back against the bench. Sometimes memory weighs more than truth. Eliza reached out, placing a hand over his. His skin was warm, and she felt the tremor of emotion under his fingertips. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That sounds unbearable." He lifted his head and looked at her. It was. But surviving taught me that grief can't be outdriven or outworked. You learn to carry it with you. He offered her a small, rueful smile. "You said it yourself, kids are tougher than we think." "So are we." Eliza nodded, blinking back tears. "You're right." She drew in a ragged breath and let it go. The market's bustle resumed around them, the clink of mason jars, the hum of conversation, the jangle of a stray guitar from a busker tucked in the corner. The world felt large and welcoming again. Carson stood and offered her his hand. "Feel better?" he asked. She took it, rising with a new steadiness. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He led her back onto the main path, and they paused at a stand where a woman offered samples of spiced apple cider. Eliza took one, the warmth of cinnamon and clove sliding sweetly across her tongue. She closed her eyes and tilted her face to the sun, letting the apple's brightness chase away the shadow of her memory. Lily and Noah reappeared, each clutching a small paper bag of kettle corn. Lily held out her treat to Eliza. "Here, Mommy," she said, voice full of pride. "It's your favorite." Eliza accepted a handful of sugar-dusted popcorn, each kernel popping with a gentle crack. She nibbled one, and the sugary crunch grounded her in the present. Carson watched her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, "this place, it's like a living memory book. All the good ones, at least." He gestured to a line of old friends chatting by a pie contest table, to the musicians' call and response, with the crowd to a pair of elderly men haggling over the price of garden-grown zucchinis. "People bring the best of themselves here." Eliza smiled, meeting his eyes. "I think I'm starting to feel that too." She dipped her hand into Noah's bag and popped another piece of kettle corn in her mouth. "It's nice to be part of something that's ordinary." He nodded, and together they wound deeper into the market, past a display of hand-carved wooden bowls to a stall selling fresh mozzarella. The woman behind the counter offered them a sample drizzled with honey, and Eliza's eyes lit up at the creamy bite. She glanced at Carson. "You have to try this." He tasted it, his eyebrows rising. "That's incredible." They lingered there, savoring mozzarella and jam, sharing bites of peaches and sips of iced tea. The day stretched before them, a canvas of simple joys and quiet triumphs. By mid-afternoon, their arms were laden with sacks of peaches, jars of jam, and a bouquet of daisies. As the sun dipped low, they made their way back to the cabin. The weight of their bounty, a comforting reminder of the day's generosity. Lily marched ahead, humming a tune she'd picked up from the busker, while Noah chattered about building a castle in the creek with his mother and Lily. Eliza paused at the porch light, placing her bags down. She ran a hand over the painted lamp, its warm glow already mirroring the sunset. Carson knelt beside her, gathering the children in a close hug. Eliza closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of peaches and daisies and homecoming. He stood and held her gaze. "You did good today," he said softly. She rested her forehead against his chest and nodded. "So did you." Together they carried their market treasures inside, where the kitchen table waited empty, but for the promise of a home-cooked meal made from ingredients they'd hand-picked. As the cabin door closed on the last light of dusk, Eliza felt the embers of her past grow quieter, replaced by the steady warmth of belonging. And in that gentle twilight, she knew that sometimes healing came, not in battles won or medals earned, but in the soft glow of a porch light, in the simple act of sharing popcorn under a summer sky. Eliza sank onto the edge of the guest room bed, the last of the day's light streaming through the window and catching the faded floral pattern of the quilt where she sat. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the thin official-looking envelope and removed the crisp letter inside. The government seal stared back at her, pale and indifferent. She traced the words with her thumb. "We regret to inform you." Her chest tightened, and for a moment she let herself breathe in the sting of defeat. She had seen this letter before too many times. Each rejection in the stack on the bedside table was its own dagger. Too many applications, too few spaces, too little priority. 5 letters in 6 months, each one more damning than the last. The first 2 had barely registered beyond a dull ache. By the third, she'd tried not to let the words sink in. Now the 5th, the pile of denials, was a reminder that no matter how many deployments she'd endured, no matter the medals for bravery she'd earned, she was merely another file in the VA's backlog, lost in the shuffle. Her shoulders slumped as the paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She didn't look at it. She had no energy left for anger. She only felt the hollow where hope used to live. Outside, the last fireflies of summer blinked through the dusky air, and somewhere in the distance, Noah and Lily's laughter drifted up from the creek. She closed her eyes, wishing she could bottle their innocence and swallow it, hoping it would soothe the rawness inside her. A soft knock on the doorframe startled her. Carson stood there, folded plate in hand, remnants of dinner gathering in the grooves. He paused, sensing the weight of her mood, and set the plate gently on the nightstand. The clang of metal against wood echoed in the hush. He didn't speak. He simply sat on the edge of the bed close enough that their knees touched. With one hand, he picked up the letter from the floor and slipped it back into its envelope. He didn't ask what it said. There was no need. His presence alone was a salve against the isolation she felt. "Eliza," he said quietly. His voice carried no pity, only steady concern. "I'm sorry." The two words seemed inadequate, but they were all he had. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and watched her. She turned her head toward him, eyes rimmed red and glistening. "It's just every time I think I've done enough, I hit another wall," she confessed. She tugged at the collar of her shirt as though wishing to strip away the symbols of rank that now felt meaningless. "I spent 13 years in the Army. I faced down mortar fire and improvised explosives and came home with my daughter's smile waiting for me. But I can't get a roof over our heads. I can't even get someone to answer a phone." Carson reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. His thumb traced slow circles over her knuckles. "You faced worse," he reminded her softly. "You're still here. You're still standing." He paused, then cleared his throat. "I know that doesn't fix this letter, but I want you to know you're not alone in it." Tears bubbled up again and Eliza closed her eyes, tasting salt and sorrow. She let her head fall back against the pillows and exhaled a shaky breath. Her voice cracked. "I thought it would be different for me. I thought service meant something." The raw confession trembled in the space between them. Carson shifted, rising smoothly to his feet. He crossed to the small dresser and retrieved a narrow tin box stamped with Carson's initials. He set the box on her nightstand and clicked it open. Inside lay a stack of Carlson Station postcards embossed with the local pioneer scene alongside fountain pen stamps and half-used sheets of stationery. Eliza frowned confusion mingling with curiosity. He knelt beside her again and removed a postcard, sliding it across to her. On the paper's blank side, he had written a single line. "I've seen what you've given up to serve. You deserve to be seen now." His handwriting was familiar, steady, unhurried, full of care. She traced the words with her fingertip, the ink imprint pressing into her skin. Carson met her gaze. "You've fought for this country. Now let me fight for you." He lifted a fresh pen and held it out. "Write back. Tell them what they're missing. I'll mail it tomorrow." Eliza's breath caught. She looked down at the postcard as if seeing it for the first time. The idea of writing another letter felt tiring, like running into a storm armed with nothing but a candle. But looking into Carson's unwavering sight, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time possibility. Maybe she could protest. Maybe she could insist. Maybe someone out there still believed that the price she paid in service had meaning beyond the bureaucratic ledger. She nodded slowly, taking the pen in her hand. The nib was cool against her fingertip. Her daughter's laughter from the creek was a reminder that Lily needed her to keep fighting for a home, for security, for the promise that her mother's sacrifice counted for something. She pressed the pen to the postcard and began to write in small, determined letters. "My name is Captain Eliza Ward, United States Army, retired after 13 years of service, 3 deployments, and a commendation for bravery. I write to you not as a statistic, but as a mother, as a veteran, who believes she earned a place of belonging in this nation she served." Her heart pounded as she continued describing her daughter's needs, her own struggle with each rejection, and the impact it had on their lives. Carson sat in steady silence, watching her pour words onto the page, his presence a bulwark against her self-doubt. Occasionally he slid her a tissue or refilled her cup of chamomile tea, his gestures quiet but essential. By the time she set the pen down, the lamplight had softened, and the first flicker of stars appeared beyond the window pane. Eliza folded the postcard and slid it into its envelope, her hand steadier now that her resolve had firmed. She retrieved the stamps from the tin and pressed one into the corner. Carson offered her a final nod of encouragement, and she closed the tin with a soft click. Carson reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "No matter what they say, he promised we keep this light on." He nodded to the porch lamp glowing beyond the glass, a symbol of sanctuary he'd built for them. "We'll keep it on until someone listens." Eliza managed a small smile, the weight in her chest shifting from despair toward determination. She stood and moved to the window, pressing her palms against the cool glass. In the pale glow of the lamp, she saw her reflection. Tired eyes, set jaw, but a spark that Carson had rekindled. Behind her, he moved to close the tin box and returned it to its place on the dresser, a silent sentinel of new hope. As she turned away from the window, postcard in hand, Lily's sleepy voice drifted down the hallway. Mama Eliza's chest tightened with tenderness, and she crossed to scoop her daughter into her arms. Lily's damp curls tickled her chin as she snuggled in. Eliza held her close, pressing the postcard to her chest as if it were a shield. Carson appeared beside them, a gentle smile on his face. He ruffled Noah's hair as he followed behind. The three of them formed a circle of light in the dim room, united in quiet solidarity. Eliza met Carson's eyes, and the unspoken promise passed between them. They would face the bureaucracy together, one letter at a time, until at least someone heard her story. Outside, the porch light continued to glow, a beacon in the gathering night. Inside, Eliza folded her arms around her daughter and whispered, "We'll get through this." And for the first time in months, she believed it. Dawn's first pale fingers slipped through the curtains just as Eliza rose from the guest room bed. The cabin was hushed, save for the soft drone of the refrigerator and the faint hiss of the wood stove's last embers. On the kitchen counter lay a yellow sticky note in Carson's familiar scrawl. "Back soon. Coffee's strong." Beneath it, a freshly poured mug steamed gently, its aroma rich with promise. Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic and closed her eyes, savoring the comfort of a hot drink made on her behalf. Lily stirred on the sofa in her pajamas, blanket bunched at her feet. Noah was curled in the corner with his sketch pad. Eliza took a careful sip, then carried her mug to the small table, settling into the seat opposite her daughter's makeshift fortress of pillows. Morning. Mama Lily mumbled blinking sleep from her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," Eliza replied, brushing a damp strand of hair from Lily's cheek before taking another sip. She let the coffee chase away the last dregs of fatigue, and in its warmth she felt the stirrings of determination she hadn't known she still possessed. Noah looked up from his drawing of the cabin under the porch light. "It smells good," he said, pointing at her mug. Eliza smiled. Carson's secret roast, she teased, lifting the cup for Noah to sniff. Special blend guaranteed to wake ghosts. He laughed softly, and Lily pushed off her blanket to climb into Eliza's lap. Eliza stroked Lily's hair, her eyes drifting to the sticky note. Something about Carson's quiet support, the way he didn't demand thanks or explanations, filled her with gratitude stronger than any words. Halfway through her second cup, Carson reappeared in the doorway, groceries cradled in one arm and a slim stack of stamped envelopes in the other. He looked as though he'd wrestled the market and bureaucracy both before arriving here. His eyes brightened when he saw them gathered at the table. "You two look cozy," he said, setting down paper sacks of fresh fruit eggs and a loaf of crusty bread. "Found everything we needed." "And—" he tapped the letters against the countertop. "These came too." Eliza sat up straighter, heart fluttering. She gathered the envelopes in her hands, turning them over to read the seals, one addressed to the mayor's office, another to the VA regional liaison, and a third simply labeled Community Support. She looked at Carson. "I did this," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Wrote out the details, your service record, your situation. Stamped and ready, you don't have to fight alone." Tears pricked her eyes. She realized that kindness wasn't just opening her door in a storm. It was action advocacy, a tangible promise that she mattered. Her throat thick with emotion, she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, brushing off her gratitude with a humble shrug. "Just keep the light on," he said, glancing at the lamp on the porch that he never let go dark. "Someone will notice." Lily hopped down and clambered onto Carson's lap, reaching into one of the grocery bags. He produced a small carton of berries, popping a handful into Lily's waiting hands. Noah poured juice into glasses. The kitchen hummed with quiet life, the morning sun glinting off the enamelware. Once the children were fed and Carson had brewed a fresh pot of coffee for himself, Eliza sat with the letters in front of her. She traced her finger along his neat handwriting, reading and rereading his notes about waiting lists, transitional housing, and community advocacy. Each sentence carried the weight of his belief in her. Carson washed his hands at the sink and dried them on a towel. "When you're ready, we can mail these. I'll walk them down to the post office, get them on today's route." He paused, watching her gather the envelopes. "Or if you'd like to bring in the paperwork yourself, I can stay here with the kids." Eliza considered the offer and shook her head. "I want to do it," she said firmly. but I'd like you to come with me just in case." She gave him a playful look that undercut the seriousness of her words. "I could use a co-pilot." He smiled, and together they gathered the letters and clipped them neatly into his coat pocket. Lily raced ahead to find shoes. Noah grabbed a sketch bag, and Eliza tucked the last envelope into her own pocket. At the post office, the line moved slowly, neighbors chatting in gentle tones about the weather and the upcoming county fair. Carson stood by Eliza's side, his presence a silent shield against embarrassment or doubt. When her turn came, Eliza placed the 3 letters on the counter, voice steady as she explained that these needed special handling, please and thank you. The clerk nodded with a warm understanding and affixed the postage. Outside, Eliza breathed deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs with hope. Carson wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "One step at a time," he said. Eliza nodded, watching the mail carrier wheel the letters away. Each one felt like a spark sent into the world. Small flames that might light someone else's dark corner. "One step," she agreed. Back at the cabin, they unloaded the groceries together. Eliza arranged the fruit in a bowl, its vivid colors a reminder that life could still burst forth in unexpected ways. Carson set the bread on the table and poured them each a second cup of coffee. He handed her the mug, and she accepted it with a soft smile. They sat side by side, sipping in companionable silence, the children's laughter drifting in from the creek behind the cabin. Eliza felt, perhaps for the first time in months, truly seen not as a file number or a broken veteran, but as someone worth fighting for. She lifted her mug in a quiet toast. "To the light we keep on," she said, glancing at the small lamp flickering by the porch window. Carson clinked his mug against hers. "And to the people who keep it burning." Eliza settled back in her chair, heart full. The path forward might still be uncertain. The letters might go unanswered. The waiting list might not move, but she no longer faced that prospect alone. She had a partner in kindness, someone whose every action said she belonged. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, she watched Carson unpack milk and eggs, his efficient movements a testament to a life of care for others. Eliza closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her, the scent of pine, the murmur of the creek, the taste of strong coffee, and the knowledge that tomorrow and the next day they would face whatever came together. In the gentle quiet of Cedar Hollow cabin, she found herself believing once more that sometimes the brightest light is not the one waiting at home for you, but the one you ignite when you decide to keep going and to help someone else do the same. Eliza pressed the 2 crisp pages of her orders against the kitchen counter, the words blurring at the edges as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The early afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting stiff shadows over the family photo on the fridge. Lily's small arm wrapped around Carson's waist, Noah grinning beside them. She inhaled the familiar scent of pine and simmering soup, the comfort of Cedar Hollow's routine, colliding with the thrill of purpose pulsing in her blood. Carson looked up from chopping carrots, his knife slicing through orange rounds with quiet precision. He noticed the tremor in Eliza's hand as she held the papers, then set the cutting board aside. "What is it?" he asked gently, stepping closer. She laid the orders flat and smoothed them with a fingertip. "Colorado," she said, voice trembling. 6 weeks. Trauma training for new recruits. They want me to lead." The words sounded unbelievable, each syllable carrying the weight of duty she'd spent years honing. Carson's brow furrowed as he reached out and folded the papers in half. "That's amazing," he said, meeting her gaze with pride shining in his eyes. "It's exactly what you've trained for." Her chest tightened. "I know." She ran a hand through damp hair, then tucked a loose strand behind her ear. "But it's 6 weeks away from home. From Lily. From you." Her voice cracked on the last word. She placed a hand against her belly, imagining how Lily's laughter would fade without her mother's voice nearby. Carson crossed the short distance and took her hands in his. He gently guided her to the worn wooden table where they had mailed her letters of advocacy weeks before. Outside the front porch lamp glowed, even in daylight, a symbol of sanctuary he'd promised. She felt safe there, but fear wriggled in her gut like a restless snake. "I won't ask you to stay," he said softly, thumb brushing her knuckles. His voice held a solemn vow. "But I'll wait." She closed her eyes, leaning into his steadiness. The kitchen faded away, no clatter of dishes, no hiss of the wood stove. Only Carson's heartbeat reverberated through her chest. She could stay a quiet life of farmhouse chores, children's laughter, and porch-side tea, or she could return to the front lines of healing, applying her battlefield-honed skills to guide others through trauma. Lily's footsteps padded into the room, bare feet thudding against the floor. She climbed onto Carson's lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Mommy?" she asked, tilting her head as though sensing the tension. Her wide eyes searched Eliza's unspoken questions glittering in their depths. Eliza knelt and stroked Lily's damp curls. "Something's come up at work," she said gently, forcing calm into her tone. "They need me to help people who've been through very hard things." Lily's brow furrowed. "Do you have to go?" she whispered. Eliza swallowed. "They want me to, sweetheart." She tracked Lily's lip with her fingertip. "I don't know yet if I will." Lily's small face scrunched, tears pooling. Carson pulled her closer, murmuring reassurance. Eliza felt her heart splinter, each piece fracturing between loyalty to her new family here and her lifelong oath to serve. An ache rose in her chest as she remembered the faces of wounded soldiers she'd helped on base, the haunted eyes of men and women who trembled at midnight, who flinched at sudden noises, who carried their battlefield scars like funeral shrouds. Colorado's program offered a chance to guide them to pass on the resilience she'd forged over 3 deployments. Duty called to her like a flare in the dark. Yet here in this cabin, Lily's yawning puddle of jelly beans mouth awaited her bedtime story. Noah needed his mother's help with algebra homework, his earlier attempts at fractions gathering magnets on the fridge. And Carson read her every mood in the slope of her shoulders, the crease of her brow. He'd built this home with hope and action. His silent vigil for her had proven kindness could be more than a gesture. Carson stood sweeping Lily into his arms and carrying her to the table. He reached into his pocket and produced a postcard, one he'd drawn himself, of the cabin's porch light lantern jar atop the railing. He slid it across to Eliza. "No matter where you go," he said, eyes steady, "this light will be here for you." Eliza's throat constricted. She picked up the postcard, feeling the rough texture under her fingers. She traced the painted lantern, recalling the glow that had guided her through the storm months ago. That light had shown her a path to healing both for herself and for Lily. She inhaled slowly, mind weighing both worlds, the call to duty in the Rockies, and the laughter echoing in these wooden walls. For a moment, time stilled only the hum of distant cicadas, and the whisper of pine needles trembling in the breeze reached her ears. "I need to talk to them," she said, finally. Voice low but resolute. "Not just accept or decline. I need to explain, to find out if weekends housing for Lily or something flexible exists." She looked at Carson. "I want to do this, but not at the cost of losing us." Carson's expression softened relief mingling with pride. "That's all I ask," he replied. He reached across and squeezed her hand firmly. "Fight for your purpose, but fight for your family too." Eliza nodded, the conflict easing into clarity. She envisioned herself in a Colorado lecture hall instructing new recruits on trauma integration and resilience. On weekends, she'd return to this cabin to morning coffee and children's drawings tacked above the sink, to evenings spent rebuilding a crooked picket fence. The balance seemed daunting, but not impossible. Her heart pulsed with renewed intention. She dug her phone from her pocket and dialed the liaison's number scrawled on one of the orders. Carson stood behind her, gentle pressure at her shoulder. The line rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Eliza introduced herself, fumbling at first as she asked about adjustments for family base housing and weekend leaves. Each question carried her fear of pulling away from Lily's safety net. On the third call, the liaison offered a pause, transitional family quarters at Fort Carson childcare programs on base, and weekend passes for trainers. Eliza's breath caught at the possibility duty and family both honored. She thanked the liaison, promising to finalize within 24 hours, then ended the call. She exhaled, phone slipping from her fingers. Carson's arms enveloped her from behind his cheek, resting against hers. "You did it," he murmured. A soft smile touched her lips. "We did it," she corrected, turning to wrap her arms around his waist. Lily toddled back, rubbing sleepy eyes, and Noah burst in with a triumphant grin, proudly holding up a perfect A on his math worksheet. Eliza knelt to hug them both, feeling the weight of her choice settle into comfort. She kissed each child's forehead, then turned to Carson. "I accepted," she said, voice steady. 6 weeks trauma training, but I'll be home weekends. Lily's got base daycare and Noah can stay here with you. Carson's eyes glistened. He pulled her into a hug so fierce it felt like homecoming. Lily giggled and wrapped her arms around both of them, and Noah joined the embrace, pressing his cheek to Eliza's. Standing there in the kitchen, sunlight filtering through steam and flour speckles on the counter, they formed a circle unbroken by duty or distance. Eliza closed her eyes, drawing in the warmth of the moment, the trust, the partnership, the promise of return. In choosing both her calling and her family, she realized that true purpose didn't demand sacrifice of one for the other. Instead, it thrived in the unity they had forged, a life anchored by kindness, resilience, and a light that would always guide her home. Carson closed the kitchen window and brushed a stray pine needle from the counter, listening to the steady drum of rain against the roof. The cabin was quiet, far quieter than he'd grown used to these past 6 weeks. Noah was curled under a heavy blanket on the couch, halfway through a graphic novel, and Lily's soft breathing rose and fell in the guest room where she'd fallen asleep, clutching her favorite rag doll. He glanced at the mantel where Eliza's photo from that first rainy night still stood in a simple frame, the porch light glowing behind her like a promise. He reached for his mug and poured another cup of tea, his fourth, maybe fifth. Humming a low tune he'd learned from Marlene before the world grew small and heavy. The steam curled against his cheek as he settled into the rocking chair, rocking gently to the rhythm of the rain. Weeks had passed since Eliza left for Colorado. She'd called every weekend, her voice bright but tight around the edges, telling stories of late-night lectures and field trainings of young soldiers blinking back tears and clinging to her guidance like a lifeline. He'd listened and tried not to let his throat catch when she reminded him she'd be home on Sunday evenings. He wasn't sure how many Sundays had come and gone before this one. The rain had started just before dusk, a relentless curtain washing the world to gray. He'd cooked more meals than he cared to count, grilled cheese at first, then scrambled eggs, then back to grilled cheese because it was simple and it was what the kids liked. He missed Eliza's lentil soup, the way she'd stir it slowly humming, as though each swirl of the spoon carried away a bit more sorrow. A clap of thunder rumbled through the pines, and Carson set his mug on the side table. The wind rattled the window panes, and the porch light cast long shadows that danced along the walls. He wondered if Eliza would be back next weekend. Part of him feared she might get an extension. There'd been talk of new training cycles, new assignments. But he pushed the thought aside. She'd promised. She'd said she'd come home. A sudden sound interrupted his reverie, 2 soft knocks at the front door. They were tentative, unhurried, but unmistakable. Carson's heart lurched in his chest. He rose and crossed the room. Mind racing through possibilities, shore, shift workers, neighbors, checking on stray. Lightning struck branches, a late visitor lost in the storm. He flipped on the porch light before opening the door. The bulb above the rail burned steady, illuminating a wall of falling rain. And there, framed in its glow, stood Eliza, soaked through hair, plastered to her forehead, coat dripping onto the welcome mat. In her arms, Lily squinted against the downpour, clutching her rag doll like a lifeline. Lily's tiny boots were caked with mud, and her face lit up in a grin that seemed to eclipse every cloud above them. "Mommy!" Lily cried, reaching out with both arms. Eliza's lips curved into a smile that trembled with relief and exhaustion. She held Lily tighter, rocking her gently. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, rubbing Lily's back as if trying to smooth away every lonely night they'd spent apart. "I'm home." Carson's voice caught in his throat. Eliza, he managed stepping aside so they could come in. His hand closed around the doorknob and he pulled them both into the warmth. The door clicked shut, sealing out the storm. Eliza's arms slipped around his waist, and Lily burrowed into his chest, giggling as she shook drops of rain from her doll's head. Noah appeared behind them, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom," he asked, voice reedy with hope. He then broke into a grin and dashed forward, tackling Eliza in a flurry of hugging arms and scattered papers. Eliza laughed, breathless, as both children clung to her, tumbled to the floor, and gushed with a million questions all at once. Carson knelt beside them, wary of damp coats, but unwilling to let go of the moment. Okay, Eliza panted, gathering them into her lap as they settled on the entry rug. "Slow down, you two. I missed you." Lily pressed a soggy cheek against hers, and Noah curled an arm around her shoulders. Eliza closed her eyes, savoring the impossibly warm weight of both their bodies. Carson stood and retrieved towels from the rack by the stove, draping them around Eliza and then Lily. Steam rose from Lily's damp pigtails as she wriggled free and darted toward the living room. Eliza unwrapped herself from Lily's embrace and touched her husband's face with a trembling hand, a gesture so intimate and raw that it stunned him into stillness. "I wasn't supposed to come back until tomorrow evening," she murmured, voice thick. "But—" Her gaze flicked to Carson's eyes, and he nodded silently, giving her permission to say what needed saying. "I changed my flight. The training cycle got extended, and they wanted me to stay on. But I couldn't. I needed to be here." She swallowed, tears gathering. "So I found the earliest flight home, even if it meant coming in today. I had to see you." Carson reached for her hand, and their fingers wove together the simple clasp, saying everything. "You're here," he replied, voice husky. "That's all that matters." Eliza's breath quivered, and she leaned in to press her forehead against his. Around them, the cabin's light shone gentle and steady, as though celebrating her return. Outside, the rain's fury continued, but inside, nothing could touch this peace. Noah grabbed her free hand and steered her toward the couch. "Mommy, tell us about Colorado," he commanded with a grin that lit up his face. "Did you save the soldiers yet? Did they call you Captain Awesome again?" Lily toddled after him, patting the seat beside her and pressing a soggy doll into Eliza's lap. Eliza settled down, hugging them both. "Well," she began, voice already regaining its warmth. "Colorado was colder than anything I've ever seen, and they did call me Captain Awesome once or twice." Her eyes flicked to Carson, and he offered her a fond smile that told her how proud he was. She turned back to the children. "But I didn't realize how cold it could get when you're missing home." Lily leaned in close. "Are we home now?" she whispered. Eliza stroked her hair. "Yes, baby, we're home." Carson joined them on the couch, resting one arm on Eliza's shoulder, the other draped behind Noah. The four of them fit together like pieces of a puzzle, rain streaking the windows behind them, the gentle lamplight bathing their faces in golden warmth. "I know it wasn't easy," Carson said softly to Eliza to cut the assignment short. "But it means the world to all of us." His gaze held hers steady, unwavering. "Welcome home." Eliza closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her. Weeks of distance duty and longing dissolved in the safety of this embrace. She pressed her cheek to his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of cedar and coffee and home. The children murmured around them, Noah asking about the next training cycle, Lily telling them how she missed her mom's soup and bedtime stories. In the hush that followed, Carson guided her hand to the lantern ornament she'd once held that first night. It hung on a hook by the door, raindrops sliding off its glass surface. Eliza's fingers curled around the cool metal. She glanced at the porch light beyond the window, still glowing steady in the downpour. They sat that way for a long time, watching the rain, listening to the children's whispers. No grand speeches were needed, no orchestrated reunion required. The simple act of her knock, 2 soft taps, had summoned them all back together. In that moment, Eliza knew that duty and family could both hold her heart, that coming home might be the bravest choice she ever made. When the children finally drifted off to talk of pancakes and painting rocks, Eliza and Carson rose and carried them to bed, tucking them in with gentle kisses. Back in the living room, they sank into the couch again, exhaustion and joy mingling in their bones. Carson reached for Eliza's hand. "We've been through a lot," he said, voice low, "but we're still here, still together." Eliza leaned into him, heart full. "More than together," she replied. "We're home." Outside, the rain tapered to a soft murmur. Inside, the porch light shone on an unwavering sentinel of the love that had brought them back. And as they sat side by side, the world outside fell away, leaving only the warmth of home and the promise of every tomorrow spent together. The first hints of spring softened the air around Cedar Hollow cabin crocuses, pushing through damp soil robins trilling from the pine tops, and a gentle breeze stirring the flag tulips by the fence. Early one Saturday morning, Eliza slipped into her Cedar Ridge Emergency Services uniform, navy windbreaker sturdy boots, and paused at the mirror to tuck her damp ponytail into its proper place. She glanced at the framed photo on the dresser herself, in fatigues, Lily and Noah grinning at her side, the porch light glowing behind them. It felt like a lifetime ago that she'd climbed into Carson's truck in the storm, wondering if kindness was enough to save her. Now kindness had become action as well as promise. Downstairs, the smell of frying bacon mingled with the pine-scented draft drifting under the door. Carson was already at the stove flipping bacon with ease and humming a tune Marlene had once played on vinyl. Noah sat at the table, knees tucked under his chin, sketching a design for their new project. Lily chased a bright blue butterfly across the flagstone patio, laughter trailing like ribbons behind her. Eliza joined Carson by the stove. He handed her a plate piled with eggs and bacon. "Thought you'd like a proper breakfast before we get to work," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. His tone held the promise of partnership that had carried them through every storm. She kissed his cheek and settled at the table, listening to the soft slap of bacon against her plate. Noah set down his pencil and pushed his sketch toward her. "Here's the plan," he said, pointing at the drawing of a tall post with a lantern on top. "We'll put the promises here." Lily returned, clutching a handful of daisies. She perched on the bench and beamed. "For me," she asked, plucking petals one by one. Eliza nodded, tearing off a strip of waterproof paper from the roll Carson had tucked in his back pocket. "Every promise deserves its own parchment." She smiled at the sight of her children, resilient, hopeful, and ready to build something that would outlast any storm. Out in the backyard, the morning sun carved patterns through the pines, lighting the dewy grass like a field of jewels. Carson carried the long wooden post that would become their promise post. It was one he'd milled himself sturdy and straight, a testament to both craftsmanship and care. Eliza held the base as he rammed it into the ground, gravel crunching beneath his boots. Noah and Lily watched from a distance, their excitement humming in the air. Once the post stood secure, Carson retrieved the lantern they'd used on the first night Eliza arrived. He clipped it atop the post, its glass panes catching the sun and scattering prismatic light across the yard. "Just like the porch," Eliza murmured, reaching up to touch the lantern. "A beacon for home." Carson stepped back, offering her the roll of paper and a set of markers. "Let's start with you," he said. Eliza held a paper against the post, the breeze fluttering its edge. She uncapped a black marker and paused, drawing in a breath. The words she wrote were simple but carried the weight of every choice she'd made. "I promise not to run when love grows quiet. I will stay even when it's hard." She tied the paper around the post with a piece of twine and stepped back, letting the promise flutter in the breeze. Noah ran forward and claimed the next paper. He wrote in bold, uneven letters, "I promise to build forts that keep everyone safe." He made sure to include his trademark flourish, a tiny doodle of a flag atop a fortress, and wound the paper around the post, grinning when Eliza and Carson applauded. Lily followed her paper barely large enough for her scrawl, "I promise to pick flowers for everyone." She tied her vow under Noah's, then skipped backward, proud of the wild bouquet of daisies she'd plucked earlier, leaving them in a small cluster at the post's base. Carson took the next turn, writing steady, thoughtful words. "I promise to keep the light on and my arms open for all who need shelter." He tied his paper above Eliza's, the lantern's glow already shining through the message. As they worked, the children darted around collecting rocks and arranging them in a circle at the post's foot. Eliza watched them, her heart full. The promise post was more than a craft project. It was the physical embodiment of all they'd weathered together, from storms and rejections to uprootings and reunions. When the last paper was tied, they stood in a quiet circle, the early morning warmth wrapping around them. The lantern above caught the breeze and swung gently, sending flickers of sunlight across their faces. Eliza stepped forward and touched the post, tracing the promises with her fingertip. She felt the rough grain of the wood, the smooth slickness of marker on paper, and the steady resolve that had brought them here. Carson slipped an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. "Look at that," he said, voice soft. "We built something that'll stand through wind and rain." Eliza nodded, her gaze drifting from the post to the cabin's porch light in the distance. It too gleamed steady in the morning. "Just like the porch," she whispered. "Nothing fancy? Just a light." Noah tugged at Eliza's sleeve. "Mommy, can we add more promises later?" he asked, excitement dancing in his eyes. "Absolutely," she replied, ruffling his hair. "We'll add one every spring." Lily skipped forward, holding out a daisy. "I picked this promise flower," she said, pressing it into Eliza's hand. Eliza tucked the daisy behind Lily's ear and swept both children into a hug. "The best promise flower," she murmured. Carson watched them, a smile playing across his lips. "Family," he said, gesturing to the post, the lantern, and the circle of promises. That's our greatest promise. They lingered in the yard, the children trailing behind them like small shadows pointing out ladybugs on leaves and whispering plans for next spring's editions. Eliza and Carson walked hand in hand to the porch, the promise post standing sentinel behind them. The porch light, though unlit in the bright sun, seemed to resonate with the energy of their vows, steady and unwavering. Inside the warmth of home awaited the scent of scrambled eggs lingering in the kitchen, the hush of summer radio playing softly, and the promise of backyard adventures to come. Eliza paused at the doorway, turning back to the post. The waterproof papers fluttered each vow, a testament to their journey from strangers under a storm to a family bound by light and promise. She brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear and stepped inside as Lily and Noah chased each other around the table, laughter ricocheting off the walls. Carson closed the door behind her, his hand lingering on hers in silent affirmation. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and rose, the family stepped outside again. They gathered by the promise post, its papers now illuminated by the newly lit lantern. The glow was soft but resolute, carving a pool of amber light in the growing twilight. Eliza Carson. Noah and Lily stood together, faces upturned, watching the fluttering promises sway gently in the dusk. In that moment, Eliza realized that kindness, resilience, and second chances weren't grand gestures. They were the humble power of a light kept on the steady construction of trust, nail by nail, and the quiet vows spoken in morning dew. Under the porch light and the promise post, they discovered that love once rooted in simple acts of shelter could bloom like wildflowers, bright and unassuming in a garden of their own making.